Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening for Crime Unveiled with Courtney Bennett. I have a guest who's joining us tonight from Cooley Law School. Professor Michael McDaniel joins us now. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us. We are exactly 1 week out from Election Day, from the presidential election in Michigan. I know that you have some experience talking about election law, election lawsuits, things like that. Let's just start off when it comes to election lawsuits. What could we be looking at?
Thank you for having me, Courtney. There are approximately 90 lawsuits that have already been filed in the various states, mostly the battleground states, and by both parties, frankly. It is in some cases by malign actors who are trying to discredit the election process. And in some cases, there are lawsuits that are seeking to just clarify the way that changes in state election laws are being implemented, new laws that have been passed since the last presidential election. And we saw the same thing in Michigan. Let's not forget that we had a Proposition 2 passed in 2022 in Michigan, a voters' initiative by a group called Promote the Vote. And as a result of that, here in Michigan, we have about 8 days of early voting available. And from all accounts, Courtney, that's been very popular. I think I saw figures of 150,000 votes the first day and over 250 for the weekend, which means another 100,000 on Sunday. I haven't seen numbers for either today or Monday, but I understand anecdotally that there have been some lines at the designated voting places around the state with this early voting. So it looks like it's a success in Michigan, and it's a salutary piece of not really legislation. It was a voter initiative to achieve this result, and one that has been adopted and used by the Michigan voters.
When it comes to lawsuits that have to do with certification of the vote, would we be looking at a possible delay in that?
Well, I hate to be a lawyer and say it depends, but it sort of does. I think the one good thing that we can say is in that same year, 2022, we had a federal law passed that has as its purpose to avoid or prevent a lot of the mischief that we saw in the last presidential election in terms of certifying the vote on January 6th of the year after the vote, which in our case would be in 2025. For example, with the new Electoral College Reform Act, Electoral Count Reform Act, of 2022, it makes it very clear that the state's governor is the one to certify the state electors, which was a question in some states. It wasn't in Michigan, but it was in a number of states. And then it also makes it very clear that the role of the vice president is not to reject votes. It is purely ministerial. It is not there to have any discretionary function whatsoever, as former President Trump and his lawyers adamantly advocated for back after the last election. Mike Pence today could not, if he had wanted to, reject any state's votes. And then the other question, remember, and the reason that on January 6th it was such a drawn out affair, besides the riot or insurrection that occurred, the invasion of the Capitol building, which halted the votes for quite a while, Courtney. The other thing was that you had a process where if you had one senator and one House member object to a vote, then you had to stop and debate that. So the new Reform Act of 2022 says that to reach the level where you can have such debate on a state's electors and whether they were qualified and can vote, you have to have at least 20%. So you'd have to have, that'd be somewhere around 80 House members and 20 senators that would have to raise that vote. And then it's a simple majority. It doesn't mean you can't still have mischief. but it makes it much harder to have the mischief that we saw 4 years ago.
That's very interesting that you mentioned about, it makes it more difficult. So with these laws in place, will we see what we saw in 2020, or do you think that it will be less of that, knowing what these laws are?
I think there should be less, but I am certain that both political parties have got hordes of attorneys out there to either defend against or come up with new lawsuits that we haven't thought of yet. I think the only, or I shouldn't say only, but the purest way to assure that we have election results fairly quickly is for everybody to get out to vote, and for one side or the other to have an overwhelming majority of electoral votes. There is still the scenario that, the one that keeps me up at night is we still have the scenario where if the battleground states are split and each presidential candidate gets 269 electoral votes, and you need 270. Just to remind your listeners that there is a total, I believe, of 535 electors, which means it's equal to the number of U.S. representatives. No, 538, equal to the number of representatives, U.S. senators, and then 3 electors for Washington, D.C. That's how we get to 538. So you have to have 270 to have a majority. If each side comes in at 269, which is possible given that number, then that throws the determination of the election to the House of Representatives. And I don't believe we've seen this since immediately post-Civil War in 1876, where neither side had a majority of the electors or of the Electoral College. And if you have 269 to 269, then the House votes, and the House votes by 1 vote per Senate. It's not a vote of all the members. 1 vote per state. I misspoke, Courtney. 1 vote per state. Mm-hmm. So to clarify, it's not a vote of all the House members. Each state gets a single vote, and there may be a greater blue population overall in the United States, but there are more red states than blue states. And if that's the case, you would end up presumably with the majority of red states voting and to give the Republican presidential candidate the presidency.
Are you aware of any time within the last, let's say, 30 years, we can even go back farther, are you aware of any time that there were this many lawsuits surrounding an election that we've seen recently? No. We didn't have this many 4 years ago, which was a high watermark, we thought, for the number of lawsuits. As I said, there is over 90 lawsuits already, and we haven't even had the election. There are a lot that are being prepared, I understand, depending upon the outcome in various states and whether various state laws are properly enforced. There is one, I understand, that will challenge the federal law that I just mentioned, the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022, that will challenge that, saying that it is unconstitutional, that it's contrary to Article 2 of the Constitution, which sets out the electoral count process. I don't think it is, but that just shows, I think, or demonstrates that there's a lot of individuals volunteering or working for the different parties and principles here to seek lawsuits. So don't expect that we're going to have election results on next Tuesday night, because we won't. If you think about it, just looking at Michigan, for your listeners, viewers in Michigan, you remember we've got these 8 days of early voting. Well, under Proposal 2, you can't start to count those votes until Election Day. So all the votes have to be counted on Election Day. Now, the clerks, the election clerks and the Secretary of State, giving them guidance and equipment and supervision, have a process in place so they can start tabulating those as soon as voting opens that day. But it's still
quite likely that we may have some delay in learning results in our state and certainly in other states which aren't as efficient as the state of Michigan.
You mentioned all the lawsuits. There was actually one that a decision came out today regarding Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appearing on the Michigan ballot. The Supreme Court saying that, yes, his name won't be removed. It'll remain on the ballot. People have already voted, as you mentioned. Thousands of people have voted. That's just early in-person voting. That doesn't include absentee ballots. So to remove his name, if they ruled on that, I mean, how would that all work?
Sure, that's a great example, Courtney. So let's explore that a little bit. First, we have Michigan law directly on point, and the Michigan law says that if you have been nominated at a state party convention and you have accepted that nomination, then you can't later withdraw. So we had, I think it was the Natural Law Party that nominated Bobby Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He accepted it some months ago. When he tried to withdraw in August, it was already too late. There's no provision in Michigan law to allow a party candidate to withdraw. And then there's the fact, as you just pointed out, that it takes some time to get the ballots prepared and get them printed, have them ready to go, have unique barcodes, send them out under early voting and absentee voting, which has been expanded in the state. So it's past the time for the Supreme Court to be able to do that without affecting the vote itself. There is also a law that says, a federal law that says you can't have the election later than the first Tuesday after the first Monday in the month of November. So you can't move it back anyway. You cannot postpone the election. In some dramatic circumstances, I don't know, another hurricane in North Carolina, perhaps you could extend it, but you can't postpone it. And then there's the idea of a grace period that federal law requires that you can't have any changes, that a state legislature can't pass any laws to change the voting process within this grace period prior to the election. So for all those reasons, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on the ballot in the state of Michigan. No idea, of course, we'd be speculating as to whether that has any impact or not, and whether or not there's any third party, a significant number of third party votes to make a difference or not.
Talk to me a little bit about what's allowed when you're walking in to vote, because you can't wear, political shirts, things like that. What's allowed when you vote?
Right. So this comes up a lot. So let's just take a minute and think about this. Let's be law students, like you're in my con law class. We have a couple of really important principles here. And one of them, of course, is that you have a First Amendment right to express yourself. And in most cases, that First Amendment right to express yourself is almost unparalleled. It's first and foremost of all our rights in the First Amendment. And certainly that would include wearing certain garb, in public. But there has to be a balance there with the right of all individuals also to have a unfettered decision making in their voting. And that proposal, just to go off on a quick tangent, that proposal 2 in Michigan made it very clear in the Michigan Constitution that you have a fundamental right to vote. Now that seems obvious, but it's good for that to be, codified, written in stone, carved in stone in the Michigan Constitution. And while we say, yes, that's obvious, but that means you also have a right to make that decision to vote without any possibility of any sort of intimidation or coercion. And so as a result, there is a balancing of these two really strong constitutional rights that we have. The right to express ourselves and the right to vote free of any coercion or intimidation. And that balance has come down many times. It's come down from the U.S. Supreme Court saying you can't have certain garb gear within the election polling place itself. And you can have reasonable restrictions outside. You can say 100 feet, 100 yards. I forget exactly what the number was that the court said was sufficient to assure that we have a right to go to the polling place without feeling intimidated by individuals or groups of individuals, or even just signs outside the polling place. So yes, absolutely, there's that right. Certainly, there have been cases so far this election already where individuals wearing red hats with certain lettering on them have tried to wear those hats into the polling place and have felt that their rights were being violated, that they were not able to wear whatever they wanted into the polling place. And the answer is, you tuck it away until after you voted and you've walked the prescribed distance. Certainly, you have a right to wear that just about anywhere else, but not within the polling place. Or else.
As we wrap things up here, Professor McDaniel, so is there anything else that you want to say that we didn't talk about?
I just want to encourage everyone to vote. A lot of the discord and sort of hateful speech that you might see, or wrong speech that's out there, is to suggest, to imply, to discourage you from actually voting, saying, well, my vote doesn't matter. And that's absolutely not true. Every person's vote matters. Everybody should vote. I don't care who you're voting for. You need to vote. It's inherent in our duties as citizens. There's really only two. I mean, it's, you've got to vote and you got to serve on jury duties. There's some other requirements that the government may put upon us, but those are really our two fundamental duties as citizens, to assure that we have the type of society and the type of government that we all, or a majority of us, care for. So don't listen to that. Instead, talk with your family, talk with your friends, do some in-depth research, and then vote for the candidate that you think will be best for this country.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for providing so much valuable information, a lot of insight too, that I learned a lot about too as well. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, that does it for us on this Tuesday evening with Crime Unveiled with Courtney Bennett. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope that you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.